Hi, I'm Grant from Blackmagic Design. We've got some really exciting products to show you today. We even have a whole new camera, so there's going to be some really interesting things to talk about. But first I'd like to start with ATEM Mini. You know, the ATEM Mini customers are doing some really amazing work, actually some very creative work. You know, ATEM Mini just has so many different uses, and it's because it's so powerful. But it's often used on location, and the internet connectivity is really tough on your mobile because you've got to find someone to plug the Ethernet into, and that's often not possible. So we've been really working hard on this problem, and what we've got is a new software update that lets you tether your mobile phone to the ATEM Mini. Now it supports all the ATEM Mini Pro models, and that's because they're the ones that actually do the live streaming. It supports both Android and Apple phones. You pretty much just plug the phone into the USB connection on the ATEM Mini and it works. The ATEM Mini Pro will automatically recognize the phone when it's plugged in. There's no settings, you just plug in the phone and it works. So let me show you how this works. Now the ATEM Mini Pro here is set up to live stream to YouTube. And on the rear monitor, I've got the web browser with the YouTube display in it, so it's live streaming through. Now, the ATEM Mini Pro here is connected to the internet via its Ethernet connection. One thing that's really important also to know about before we do this is you have to activate the tethering on your phone to actually make this work. So I've got a phone here. It's got the tethering enabled, which is the phone here, and I've got a USB cable, so I'll plug the phone in. There it is there. And I'll plug in the other end into the USB port on the back of the ATEM Mini. So what will happen is, I don't know if you can get an overhead shot of that, but there it is, the little tethering icons come up. It's a bit different. I've got an older phone, so this phone's a newer one, so it's got a slightly different indicator. Now the ATEM Mini can see the phone, and if you look on the multi-view, you can see there's a little phone icons appeared on the streaming status view. So what we do now is we'll unplug the Ethernet and see how it switches across. So if I unplug the Ethernet, you'll see the icon on the multi-view is actually grey. So I've unplugged the Ethernet here, and what you'll see is it'll switch across. Now you can see the icon's gone red and it's flashed the on-air indicator, and that shows that it's now switched over and it's live streaming. And you see there's a little bit of an interruption to the live stream, but it's done a clean switch over, and now it's running with the phone data and not the Ethernet, because the Ethernet's not even plugged in. So let's switch back. So we'll plug the Ethernet back in, and we'll unplug the phone, and you'll see that I'll straighten myself up here a little bit. So the overhead camera looks great. And you'll see now it'll switch back. The phone icon's disappeared from the streaming status indicator, and it's gone back and it's switched across, and now we're streaming back on the Ethernet. It also does something that computers don't do very well, and you just saw it. Basically, that's changing between mobile data and Ethernet. The ATEM Mini Pro will keep streaming when the network changes. You can switch it backwards and forwards. So if you have an Ethernet problem, you can plug your phone in. But a lot of times software applications actually need to be quit and relaunched, because they'll actually connect through one of the services and they don't really switch across. But ATEM Mini doesn't need to do that. It'll just switch live, even while you're streaming, and you just saw how it did that. Because we've got full control. It runs Blackmagic OS, so we've got full control over the whole process of how we connect. And another thing I think it's really also important to think about with this phone tethering stuff is the mobile data speed. You know, phones can vary a lot in data rate. I mean, every internet connection can do that. Also, the data rate will go up with frame rate. So there's a lot of things to consider. Also, 5G phones are faster than 4G phones. So if there's not enough speed to do the live stream through your phone, there are some options. You can switch to a lower quality. You can also switch to a lower frame rate. And so lower frame rates are okay, of course, because all the inputs will just convert. So even if you're running 1080p 60 and you wanted to, say, stream at 24p because the data rate is too much at 60p, you can switch the switcher over to 24p. All the inputs will just convert and it'll all just work, so it's really good. So I think this mobile data will be really helpful to people. It's actually in a new software update. It's called ATEM Update 8.6, and it'll be available on our website today. We'll post that. It supports mobile data on ATEM Mini Pro and the ATEM Mini Pro ISO models, because they're the ones that got the streaming built in. And also it'll be available free of charge, so you'll just be able to download the update and add that feature. Okay, so now I wanted to discuss the ATEM Mini family as a whole. You know, the ATEM Mini has been really well received. It's got a lot of professional features, and these are not dumbed down switches, but they're true professional switches, for important work, even though they are HDMI. People have used the switches in a lot of ways we never expected, which has been quite a lot of fun to see. I mean, some remarkable ways. It's quite shocking. So we thought, really, how far could we push this design? We wanted to try, and we were sort of thinking, could we build a really much more powerful model? But how far could we take it? Like, really, how far could we push this? Could we build a high-end switcher, but kind of in an ATEM Mini design? We weren't really sure if it was possible. We've been working on this for a while, but it was a challenge we kind of set ourselves. There's a bunch of challenges. Could we make it affordable enough? Could we keep the advanced electronics cool without fan noise, which is really important because often these switches are used in the same environment with the cameras, so you don't want the fan noise being picked up. Was it even really possible to fit a big switcher into an ATEM Mini design? So, well, not fit exactly. It has grown a little bit in size, but we've been able to do it. We've pulled it off, and the new model is called ATEM Mini Extreme. It's dramatically more powerful. I'll bring one out and show you. I've got one here, so here it is. It's quite big, as you can see. It's a much bigger switcher. You can see the size difference there. Try and straighten it up a bit. So you can see it's got a much bigger control panel, a lot more controls. It's a monster, this thing. So if you're looking for a more powerful ATEM Mini, then this is it. We've really gone for it. So actually, I'll start by showing you the back. Let me let's put that aside. I'll move the phone out of the way. Let's have a look at the rear view. I don't know if you can get a close-up of that there. So there are a lot more connections on the back. So you can see that it's got the 12-volt DC input. Now it includes a bigger power supply because it's obviously uses more power. There's gigabit Ethernet built in. We're going to be able to use it for a few things in the future as well. So it's got tons of fast Ethernet. It's got the streaming built in, so it's a bit like the ATEM Mini Pro models, a bigger version of ATEM Mini Pros in some ways. So you don't need any external streaming software because that's built in. It supports YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, Vimeo, and more, just like the ATEM Mini Pro models do. But it now has 2 USB connections. So this is important if you want to, maybe you want to use a webcam while you're recording to a USB disk at the same time, or say if you want to do recording while you're live streaming via the phone, because it supports the phone tethering as well as the ATEM Mini Pro now does. Of course, you can still connect a USB hub, so if you want more devices, but I think it's really nice having 2 USB connections built in. It's much simpler. Now it's a HD switcher, so all the HDMI connections support up to 1080p 60, and it has 2 independent HDMI outputs. Now these work like aux outputs, so you can route different video sources to them. And this model has 8 inputs as well. Obviously it's twice the number of inputs. So more inputs means you can use more cameras, and that's really nice if you're using if you can't afford camera operators and you want to just use more camera angles, so you can just add more cameras. Now each input has a separate standards converter, so you could have 8 different video standards plugged in. You just plug everything in and it works. The microphones are the same microphones work. There's now an additional headphone output, and the headphones are proper monitoring output, so it's on a separate audio monitoring bus. So let's check out the front again. In fact, what we'll do is we'll plug it in, which is a bit of an ordeal with so many connections. Now I've got 8 hyperdecks that we're using as sources here. So let me just plug in. I'll actually sit it on top and start plugging away. Let's plug in some power, and I'll plug in the network, and I'll plug my video output. And I'll go through the inputs because there's quite a lot of inputs here. So sorry, it takes a moment because there's so much to plug in. It's the problem with the bigger switcher that's got so many connections. I'll get rid of my ATEM Mini Pro, move it out of the way. Actually, I'll position it so you can see on the overhead camera because we've got a camera overhead here. Now I've got a whole bunch of extra inputs because of the number of sources. I've got an extra output, which we'll plug in because it's got the 2 video outs. And I've got 4 more inputs. So I've got quite a lot of cables. And so these are all hyperdecks playing back these different camera angles of a cooking show. But camera 1 is actually a pocket camera just over there. So there we go. So we've got everything plugged in. Looks good. And we've got all nice and straight, so that overhead camera looks pretty good. So one of the first things you can see now, I've plugged in the multi-view. I've plugged, both video outputs and all inputs. You can see the multi-view is a little different, so I'll get into that in a moment. But let's have a look around the front panel and see what's on there. So we've got it now running with all 8 inputs connected, so I can just switch between all those sources. So you see there it is. And also there's the smaller source buttons over here, so you've got 2 media players and a few more things there. You can still change between cut and auto, so you can still do the transitions, just like you can with the ATEM Mini. Of course, auto is the sort of industry standard way of selecting a transition versus a cut. Any ATEM customer would already know that. Now it's got the same transition duration buttons, so it's half a second to 2 seconds, and they're located just over here, so you can change the durations of the transitions. And they've also got a fade to black control here, so it still has that. So it looks very similar to an ATEM Mini. Now the transition selection is located above the auto button over here, and we've got more of those. So you can set to different things. So for example, at the moment it's set to mix. So when you do a transition, it'll be a mix. But you can also do other transitions like dip, for example. There it is. You know, and you've got like 6 wipes on there. There's more buttons for different transitions. So you've got 6 wipes, and including horizontal, vertical, diagonal, circle, and square wipes. There's also DVE transitions. So if you can select some of those DVE transitions and do those, so you can see that they are there. And the DVE transitions on the buttons directly include push right, squeeze right, push down, squeeze down, and you know, I'll switch back to mix, and in fact I'll switch back to cut. So you can see that, you know, you've got a few more transitions over there. There's also upgraded video output controls because we've got more sources now. So the HDMI video outputs are actually like aux outputs, so you can route video to them. So output HDMI 1 has settings on the control panel here, and so you can see the location of where they are there. Now you can route sources out using the ATEM software control, where you get access to both video outs and you can use them both like auxes, but you can view it on the front panel here. So let's have a quick look. So, you know, I'm looking at, in fact, if I can switch the video across, I can see this. So that's the second video output I've got on the back there. So I can now switch the sources between the camera inputs to that video output live. And you notice that, you know, it's basically a clean feed of the video sources, and it's very, you know, the switching's very clean. Now you can connect this to a video projector, and one of those inputs could be a slideshow, and you can, you know, switch to the video projector from the front here. So it's almost like doing a separate live switch. And also Videohub control panels work. So that's nice. They've also got a multi-view output, but we'll set it back to program because we're actually using a 2-monitor display. So you can see you've got a lot of really nice controls there. Now it's got the same streaming controls on the top right of the panel there, the same on and off air controls there. You've also got the same record and stop controls. There's also some extra key controls, which we've got over here. You have the key 1 and downstream key controls on there now, and it's nice to have a downstream key button. So if you're using a logo on the downstream key, you've got that. Now again, all the keys are all available in the ATEM software control, so that's nice. Now the other thing we've got on the front panel is a bunch of macro buttons. All ATEM Mini models have macros, but the ATEM Mini Extreme has 6 macro buttons on the front panel that you can fire them by pushing one of those buttons, and there they are there. It makes them much more accessible. You can set up really complex effects and just trigger them just on one of those buttons there. I can just get a close up of that. Now the DVEs, the ATEM Mini Extreme has 2 DVEs. So you can do like a 2-up views for interviewing people. There's front panel buttons with some presets for you. So you can select some of the DVE buttons, and I've got, I can select the DVE on there. You can see I've got, that's the 2-up. I've got the different views there. I can select a few of the different ones. See there on the bottom there's the 2-up view, and you can see I've got 2 there. So that's pretty nice. And you also, again, get full control of the DVEs from the ATEM software control. But these preset buttons make working with DVEs really fast. So I'll leave that. I think that's off here. That's off. Now, the other thing we've got is a select bus. Powerful switches have what they call a select bus on the control panel. Now, what it does, it allows you to control the sources into internal processing, such as DVEs. So let me show you how this works. So say, for example, something like the dip transition, which I'll select over there. Now, we were using a color generator. When we did this before, there's a source for that dip, and we were using a color generator. That was why it was white. So when we did a dip, it went to, whoops, I've got to select order. So when I do a transition, you can see it was white because it was using a color generator, and that color generator is white. But what it allows us to do is we can change the source that we're going to use for that. Now the sources are along the top here, so you can see that, and the destinations are along the bottom. So anyhow, the destinations include inputs to keyers, DVEs, the DVE video sources, the dip source, and a lot more. So the dip is along the bottom here. So let's have a look. There it is there. So that's the dip source. So we select that on the bottom row, and then you can see that it's showing the color generator on the top row. And I think we probably picked that up on the top camera. So you can see that. So we could change it to something else. So for example, if we change it to bars, now when I do a transition, whoops, I changed it to black. There's bars. So there you go. So now I changed the dip source to bars. So you can really see how fast it is to change sources on the front panel itself. So let's change something else. Let's change one of the DVEs. So I'll turn the 2-up view back on. So let's turn the DVE back on. So you can see I've got the 2-up view with the DVEs. And now you can see I've got those 2 DVEs. So let's change the inputs to those DVEs. So the DVE sources are actually over here. Whoops, there they are. DVE 1. So now what's really interesting is I've selected DVE 1 on the lower row, and you can notice that the top row is now showing that that's the input, one of the camera inputs is going to that DVE. Now what's really interesting is that they went red. What this means is the DVE is on air, and it's a warning to show you that anything you change here will be seen by the viewers. So if I turn the DVE on and off, then you can see the color changes back to white. So you can see it's like a tally on the select bus and let you know that if you change anything, people are going to notice it. So I think that's really nice to have that. So let's select color bars. So you can see I've got some color bars. I can select some different cameras. The camera numbers are over here, so I can go through different camera sources and select those into the DVE. So you can see I've got, when I change the input, the DVE input changes. So the select bus makes this stuff much faster because you can really route all the sources. It's the same workflows you see on really big switches, but now we have it here right on the front panel. It's really fast and it's really simple to use. So I'll just turn my DVEs back off again. Now the other thing we've got in ATEM Mini Extreme is camera control right on the front panel. The buttons are located just above the inputs, so it allows really quick camera adjustments. So if I cut to camera 1, we have a Pocket Cinema Camera 6K connected to input number 1. So I can cut to input number 1, which is just here. Now this camera has studio features including lens control, tally and a color corrector. So we can control that from the switcher. So if I go between camera 1, if you can get a close up of the screen on the back, you can see as I'm switching to the camera and back again, I've got the tally light coming on and off on the LCD on the back. Now iris is the default control. So you'll notice here we've got up and down arrows. So if I start adjusting those, you can see I'm now adjusting the iris. And that's the most common control you need, which is iris. Because if you're using outside, you're doing outdoor shooting, the lighting conditions can change. So you can track those lighting conditions. So you can see there I'm changing the iris. But there's also other camera settings you can control as well. So you just need to select the override buttons. And those 4 buttons above here, if you can see that, you can see them on the overhead camera. There's all the arrows here for the iris. But these 4 buttons will override those up and down buttons. And you can say, for example, we can press gain or, well, that's black, and then we can adjust that setting. Whoops, there it is there. You've got to be fairly quick. So now there's buttons for overriding the levels for shutter speed, black, level, and focus. The focus one's actually quite interesting because if you, I'll show you basically how this works. If we just focus and really make the camera go out of focus. There it is there. So I've adjusted that camera way out of focus. Now what you can do is you can press and hold the focus button to trigger the autofocus in the camera. So if I just press and hold that button, you'll see now it'll trigger the autofocus in the camera. So it's a really great way of really fast using the camera's features itself to do the focus. Now the camera control is really simple, but it's surprisingly powerful. You have full camera control obviously in the ATEM software control, but it's quite useful to have all this on the front panel. And of course you can also use one of the ATEM camera control panels, if you really want to go for it. Now the audio controls is another set of features on the front panel. They're very similar to the other ATEM Mini models. They're located above the inputs along here. With more inputs, we still have the full audio processing on all the inputs. So each input has audio processing it has a compressor, 6-band parametric EQ, limiter, expander, and more. That's on all the inputs. And there's also now, what's been added is headphone controls for the headphone output, and they've been added on the panel here. So you've got level up and down, you can set the levels up and down. You've also got a mute and a reset as well, so that's nice for headphone control right from there. Now, even though that's the front panel, we haven't really described what's inside yet. Up until now, we've really only talked about the front panel controls, but the really big increase in power in this switcher is the internally. So what I'll do is I'll change over to the ATEM Mini software control and we can check this out. So, well, the first thing we can actually talk about is the new multi-view. So what I need to do is I'll plug in using USB into the software because we haven't got a connection up here. So let's plug in my USB and we'll plug in into one of the 2 USB ports that we've got on the back. So now we should have the ATEM software control come up. There it is. And so you can see the multi-view is a little different to the ATEM Mini Pro. I don't know if we can cut to that. We've actually taken the multi-view from the ATEM Constellation 8K. It's our best multi-view by far. It's an incredible multi-view, so this is why we wanted to really bring that across. So we've taken it from our top switcher. It still includes the audio meters on all the views. It still includes custom labels on the views, which the other ATEM Minis can do. The ATEM Mini Pros, the ATEM Mini Pros are the ones that have the multi-view. But now you can also select the number of views. It supports up to 16 views in total. So let me show you how this works. So over in the ATEM software control, all we have to do is go to the settings and select multi-view. And you can see here's our multi-view settings over here. So if I want to change to 16 views, for example, I just have to click on this little icon here and it'll now change to 16 views. So I can also change sources. So for example, I could change, well actually that's already on the audio status. So, or I could change it to, anything I really like, one of the color generators. Well, I've already got a color generator. number 1 there. I could do it on color generator 2. So you can see it's quite nice, and I'll switch it back to my program view, which I have there. Now 16 views is really great with those 2 HDMI video outputs because you can use a 2 monitor setup, which is what we actually are showing you behind. I'll go back to a nice shot. So one monitor has the 16 sources on the multi-view and the other one has the program view. So that's a really nice combination to have because you can use those 2 outputs to really give you that big program view, and then you've got tons of views on the multi-view. Now the ATEM Mini Pro also has a media player with 20 still frames. With the latest software update that we did on the ATEM Mini Pros, they even retain those still frames between a power cycle. But with the ATEM Mini Extreme, you now get 2 media players. So let's take a look at that. So if we switch to the media play page, I'll get rid of this there. And if I go to the media page, you can see I've got the 2 media players. And we can load a still into media player number 1. So I've just loaded a still into there, and I can load another graphic into media player number 2. In fact, the default media players have already set up to use slots 1 and 2. So now you have 2 video sources into the switcher, and you can see them on the multi-view. In fact, the multi-view by default shows the 2 media players there. Now, previously we showed you using DV preset buttons to turn on the 2 multi-views. We've got, DVEs. We've got 2 DVEs in the switcher. This is great for interviewing multiple people. You can show like 2 different interviewers at the same time, so it's really nice. So let me show you the DVEs in the switcher. So if I go across to the palettes, I can see I've got my upstream keyers, and there's the DVE. And you can see I can turn on that keyer. So there it is there. And I can move the DVEs around. This is where you do the adjustments. Whoops, I've got to click it there. You can see you can position those all over the place, and it's really change the size. And so 2 DVEs are really nice. So I'll turn off that key. So there's 2 key DVEs built in, and that's just really flexible. But with so many inputs, we also thought we could do a lot more. More inputs actually allow us to do some pretty exciting things. So we've actually included SuperSource in the ATEM Mini Extreme. Now what SuperSource is, if you don't know because you haven't used some of our bigger switches, SuperSource is 4 DVEs in a multi-layer compositing engine. So what this means is you actually get 4 video sources as separate DVEs in a layer stack. So you basically get a 4 DVE kind of layering engine, plus you've got the 2 DVEs that are actually built in there. So that's 6 DVEs in total in the switcher. There's also, the SuperSource has support for a background graphic as well as a foreground graphic. Now a background graphic goes behind all those DVEs, whereas a foreground graphic goes over the front of the DVEs. And that's actually really very powerful because it allows you to create like really nice graphics with borders and things. Because it goes in front of the DVEs, then it really creates nice borders on those DVEs. So it's really nice. And so SuperSource is fantastic for interviews where each interviewer has a separate picture-in-picture. It's great for gaming competitions. You could have 4 cameras and 4 consoles all connected at once because you've got enough inputs, and you could have combinations of gamers and their consoles or overlaid on top. It's really nice. So let's have a quick look and we'll show you how this works. So what we do is we'll start by selecting SuperSource on the front panel. We have a dedicated button on the front panel for SuperSource. There it is there. And now it's basically by default it's a 4-box setup, as you can see there. Now this is the SuperSource. It's not even the normal DVEs, but you can also change it in the ATEM software control. So what you do is you go into the SuperSource palette, which there it is there, and you can see I've got a bunch of different interesting combinations you can select. And you can show the arrangement positions, and you can set all the inputs to the SuperSource DVEs. So you can see there, you can change the different boxes and then do the controls and change the inputs and all the settings and where they are. And you can also load in a graphic. So for example, if I go to the media player and load in a foreground graphic, I can now change that into media player 2, and I can go back to SuperSource and I select art. Now what I need to do is I need to select media player 2 as my graphic source, but it's made that graphic the background. I actually want the graphic to be the foreground, so let's do that because it's got borders on it, and the borders actually now become the DVE borders. So you can see there it's all lined up and it looks really nice. Now, you can spend a lot of time getting all this perfect. We've actually got the graphic. This graphic just supports the default SuperSource layout. But really the trick here is to line up all the DVEs so they match the graphic. And we made this graphic to suit the default SuperSource layout, so we didn't have to spend time doing it here. But you can really see how powerful that is. Now SuperSource is really separate to those 2 main DVEs. So that means they're still available if you need to use them for something else. Although I'm not sure how much stuff you can really put on the screen at one time. Now the other thing we've done with ATEM Mini Extreme is we have 8 inputs. So we can do a lot more with the keyers. So what 8 inputs mean is that ATEM Mini Extreme is big enough to actually do virtual sets. So we now have 4 ATEM Advanced chroma keys in this switcher, which means you can do 4 separate chroma keys at the same time. They're all completely independent. So that's basically means you could have 4 separate cameras that could have a dedicated chroma key each. So you can use basically the 8 inputs to do virtual set, to create virtual sets, 4 live cameras over 4 live backgrounds. So 4 of the inputs we'd use for the cameras and then key them, and 4 inputs would be used for the live rendered backgrounds that are coming in from the virtual set processing. Now, a lot of virtual sets actually use our Decalink cards. We even have a quad HDMI model. So, I reckon third-party developers could even create some really interesting virtual set rendering machines. But you could also use macros and the media players to do fixed camera virtual sets. So let me show you the keyer palettes in the ATEM software control. So if I go across, I'll close the SuperSource one. Well, actually, we kind of showed you this before because we used it for the DVs, but there they are there. See, they're 4 independent keyers. Now, what that means is you can control these with macros and you can switch the media players into the keyers. So what that means is you could create a fixed camera virtual set all in the ATEM Mini Extreme without any extra hardware. So each camera would have a pre-rendered background. So you could basically put that behind the camera. So you can key the camera over a green screen and then put that background in the back. And if you don't move the camera, you don't really need a live motion virtual set. You can just render out some still frames from a 3D model of a set and put them behind each camera and then use the macros to switch the media players into the keyers. So it's incredibly powerful having 4 independent chroma keys. I think it's going to make the whole virtual set thing possible. I mean, that's a whole new world that we could really pretty much open up. So it's really quite exciting. Now, of course, the big question then, what about bigger work? What happens if you want to take it even further? What happens if you want to build a bigger studio? So the ATEM Mini Extreme is really the perfect match for the ATEM 1ME Advanced panel. In many ways, that became our yardstick of how big this switcher should be. Let's just make it perfect for an ATEM 1ME Advanced panel. It's a totally professional setup. It unlocks a lot of the power in the switcher. There's dedicated buttons. I've got a few slides here that you can see. It's got dedicated buttons for all the switcher functions. The design is a very traditional broadcast switcher, so it's great for training and education. So using that ATEM 1ME Advanced panel is a really good way to use the switcher. The ATEM Mini 1ME Advanced panels behind me are connected to the ATEM Mini Extreme here. And so we're running the whole panel from there. Now it shows, the great thing is you can see, and I'll bring up some slides here, you can see that all the buttons have input labels, so you can have custom source names. Now there's 10 buttons on these panels, so that supports the 8 inputs of the ATEM Mini Extreme and plus the 2 media players all along that row. And there's a shift button, so you can switch to another 10 sources. You can also see there's a nice big T-bar fader handle. It's got direct access to the downstream keyers on the right-hand side there. You can see there's a select bus, which has got all the labels on it. So again, if you custom label the inputs, it's not just numbers, they're actually the custom labels. And that select bus will switch to macro control. So there's a macro button. And when you switch over, then all your macros, you can see them by name. So if you're using, if you've done a bunch of custom macros and you've labeled them by name, then you can actually see the actual proper names on the panel because you've got an LCD for the labels. Now it's got a really large system control LCD, gives you really fast access to all the settings. You get a joystick for moving those DVEs around for both the SuperSource and the normal DVEs. So I think the ATEM Mini Extreme is a really perfect size for this panel, and it adds a completely professional workflow when you plug it in. So really this switcher can go much further if you now fill it out with some of the control panels. And you wouldn't even know it's an ATEM Mini model switcher when you're using it, if you didn't know. Also, we have the ATEM camera control panel. It's got dedicated control for all the cameras. That's also perfectly matched for this. It's got 4 controllers, but you can change the controllers really quickly. So you can do more than 4 cameras, and in this case, we'd want to use 8. It's got a really nice big knob on the front, and that's the iris control, which is the default control. It's so nice to use. If you rotate the control, it actually sets the black level. And if you push the control, it actually selects the camera to the video output. And that's something that's used by camera operators when you can use one of the, because they're proper aux outputs, you can use one of the outputs to give the camera operator a view of his cameras. So you can be using one of the camera video outputs for multi-view, while your camera operator is actually pushing the knobs and switching that second output so he can see what he's doing, and so he gets a chance to match the cameras by really quickly switching between them. There's also RGB knobs for tint, and that uses the color corrector in the camera. The pocket cameras, for example, have the color correctors built into them, and you can use the tint controls. There's lots of other controls as well. So you can really see how powerful ATEM Mini Extreme can be when you realize that once you use it with those panels, really how nice it is. It goes all the way to the most professional workflow you can get. So really, let's summarize what we have here. We've got 8 inputs. Each input has standards conversion. You just plug anything in and it works. The audio mixer supports processing on all those inputs, which means every HDMI input has a separate limiter, noise gate, compressor, and EQ. There's 4 upstream ATEM advanced chroma keys. They're the good keys, the most advanced keys we have in ATEM switches. There's 2 downstream keys for titles. There's 2 media players for graphics and titles. There's 2 independent DVEs for picture-in-picture effects. There's a super source with another 4 additional DVEs and a multi-layer processor. There's a select bus on the front panel. The multi-view supports up to 16 different views. Both HDMI outputs have source routing, so they work as aux outputs. There's a separate headphone connection with audio monitoring bus, so you've got separate audio monitoring control of that. It's really basically like a 1ME HD version of our Constellation switcher. It's basically the best 1ME switcher we have. It's way more powerful than actually our 1ME SDI models. So it's really exciting. It's an insane switcher. So it's very exciting. Now the ATEM Mini Extreme will be available now for $995. I reckon it's going to be really exciting to see how people use it. Who knows what kind of new workflows are going to be possible, particularly say things like the virtual sets and things like that. So it's really exciting. Now that's not all we've done. We have an ISO model of our ATEM Mini Pro. So we thought it'd be really nice to do an ISO model of the ATEM Mini Extreme. And we do have that. It's called ATEM Mini Extreme ISO, and it records all 8 inputs and the program video. Now this model features a massive record engine. It basically records 9 streams in total. It saves the DaVinci Resolve project, so you can record and open up your whole live production as an edit. It means you can fix bad edits, replace shots, and add color correction later. You can even trigger the record in the blackmagic pocket cameras, because those pocket cameras support blackmagic RAW files, so you can link them to the edit. And that's how you can actually do an Ultra HD film workflow in a HD switcher. So it's a great combination. The combination of blackmagic RAW and color correction makes film-looking shows. So obviously we wanted to have an ATEM Mini Extreme that can do that. That's why we felt it was really very important for us to have an ISO model of the ATEM Mini Extreme. It's really quite amazing. Let me bring one out and we can have a look. Here it is here. You can see it's kind of quite simple. It's very similar. It's the same. Actually, I'll put it above it so you can see both models compared there. Let me line that up. So you can see it's basically it looks the same as the ATEM Mini Extreme, except this is ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. So we'll plug it in, we'll transfer the connections across to this guy here. I'll put it on top because I think that might be the easiest way to transfer the connections. A little bit undignified for the switcher that's below it, but let's change the connections across. So input 3, input 4, input 5, there's so many inputs. Input 6, input 7, input 8, video output number 2. The connections on the back are exactly the same. I'll move our USB up and I'll change our Ethernet. Plug that, and my switcher's really gone offline now, and then we'll plug in ATEM Mini Extreme, and I'll take that ATEM Mini Extreme out of the way. And let's line it up so we can get that overhead camera looking good. There it is there. So you can see it's all lit up and it looks very similar to the, set some of my audio there. So you can see it's the same as the ATEM Mini Extreme, except it's the ISO model. So I've got similar multi-view, everything's there. It's got some different setups in it because it's a different switcher. So now what I'll do is I'll plug in a flash disk, which I've got here. I've got 2 USB ports, so I can plug it into the second one. So I'll plug it in there. Now because it's 9 streams, you do need a decent flash disk. Some flash disks aren't as fast as they say they are. They'll do bursts at high speed, but they won't sustain it. So make sure you're using a good quality flash disk. Now what we'll do is we'll go to the record palette because I've got to show you that. So it's in the output menu here. If we can cut across the UI, I'll turn off the live stream. Now you can see it's the same palette as the ATEM Mini Pro models use. So what we need to do is set the ISO recording on. So this is the control here. So if you turn that on, now will enable the ISO, and you can start recording. Now I can do that on the front panel, which I will do. You can do it from the UI as well. And there it is now. Now I'm recording to the disk. I can change between some of the different sources, do some cuts to different sources here. And I can do some transitions, maybe do some dissolves. There's a dissolve. So it's just like a real job. Got a nice fast transition there. Now it's worth mentioning that you can use a USB hub and use multiple disks. If you're recording with multiple disks, it'll move from disk to disk as each disk fills up. So you can record forever if you keep adding empty disks. You can also use a Blackmagic multi-dock, as it's 4 SSD disks on a single USB port. So that's really nice. Now, while it's recording, let's plug, I've got the USB actually, I'm controlling the computer by the USB. I'm not actually using it via the network, I'm using the USB connection. So I have webcam coming into the computer. So let's launch an app. I'll just use QuickTime Player. I had that open a second ago, so there it is there. And if I go to the file menu and use a video recording, I can show the webcam source. There it is there. So what I've got going on now is I've got a recording going on while I've got webcam source. And also, let's start streaming to YouTube. So if I turn on streaming, now I'll run the streaming. And so now I'm actually live streaming to YouTube, and it's now really heavily loaded up. I'm doing 9 streams of recording because I'm doing an ISO recording. I've got USB webcam going on the screen here, and I've also got live streaming to YouTube all at the same time. So now if I do some more transitions, I just keep doing that, and it's pretty nice. Now, what I can do is I can now stop recording and we can go and have a look and see what it looks like on the computer. So I'll stop recording, and I'll stop streaming as well. And I'll close this. Now I'll take my disk and I'll plug it into the computer so we can have a look what it looks like on the computer. So I've got 2 USB ports on the side of the computer. So I'll minimize my software controller, so if you can switch across to the ATEM, I don't want to use that as a backup. So there it is there. So here's my disk that I've just recorded on the ATEM Mini Pro ISO. So I can open up the disk and see what's in there. You can see I've got a whole folder with all the files that have been recorded when I was doing my recording. Let's have a look inside. So you can see I've got my folder with my ISO files. You can see the 8 inputs there. I'll go back. I've got the audio source files. I've also got a program recording here. And this is the DaVinci Resolve ISO file. So this is the program file. So basically it's the edit. So if I double click that, I've got DaVinci running in the background, and it'll now open up that folder. And there's my edit. So this is what I just did on the switcher. So if you look at the timeline, this is the cut page. I did a whole bunch of cuts and some transitions over here. And then I was talking for a while, and I do love talking. And I was talking for a while, and then I did a few more transitions towards the end here. And you can see now that I can move edits around and really retrim and do all kinds of different edits. And if I go in here, I can see I've got my ISO files in here. There's all my different camera views. So there's, that's just the recording from that one camera. So it's all really nice. You can do all kinds of editing. So, what's also great is the Blackmagic RAW files I record. If you can record them in the camera, you can change those over and link to those if you wanted to. Now, I can also use the sync bin so I can see all the camera views. So if I go up to the sync bin up here, what I've now got is, go back to my master. Now I've got all the camera views back in a multi-view because they're all synchronized. They've all got the same time code. Now I can run up and down and now re-edit, especially if you're using the speed editor, this is really fast. And I can now, re-edit or change and drop, I can use the source override edit mode, which is this one here, and it'll actually edit, various shots into the timeline and sync up all the time code and everything for you. So it's really fast to create new edits. And if you're using Blackmagic RAW files from the cameras, which you can also select to switch over to link to, you can finish in Ultra HD. And you can also do color correction because they're all film gamma. So I'll switch back to the normal media pool. And so, I think it's amazing if you think you can record, this switch will record 9 video streams all at the same time. It's an incredibly powerful model. It's very exciting. So the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO is just starting production now. So it'll probably be appearing in about a week or so. It'll be priced at $1,295, and I can't wait to see how people sort of use it. I think it's going to be really exciting. Okay, so next I wanted to talk about how to add streaming to our SDI range of switches.